A 13-year-old girl walked home wearing her hoodie, simply minding her own business. Suddenly, a police officer shoved her down onto the pavement and injured her arm. What the officer did not realize was that her father was a world champion fighter with nothing left to prove except that his daughter mattered deeply. This incident took place on a Tuesday late afternoon, the kind of day when your legs ache, your thoughts drift, and all you can think about is quenching your thirst and having dinner. Emily Coldwell, aged 13, had just finished track practice at Stanton Middle School in Modesto, California. Her earbuds were tucked away in her backpack, held tightly against her back. She took the usual shortcut as she always did, passing through Madison Street, a stretch of sidewalk bordered by broken fences and sun-bleached lawns. She wore her favorite green hoodie, a gift her dad had given her last Christmas. It was oversized and faded a little, but it made her feel secure, almost invisible. However, that day, it had quite the opposite effect. A white Ford Explorer slowed down behind her, its windows darkly tinted and adorned with a police decal. She did not initially turn around, but when the vehicle crawled to a stop right at the corner, she finally stopped and glanced over her shoulder. The officer stepped out without any urgency, no flashing lights or sirens, just that slow, deliberate walk with chest out that made anyone uneasy, even if they had done nothing wrong. "Hey you," he said. "Come here a second." Emily removed one earbud. "Do you see anyone else around here?" His voice was not raised, but it carried the tone of someone already irritated, already suspicious. She moved toward him slowly. Confused yet composed, Emily was simply heading home from practice. "You live nearby, right? What is your name?" she was asked gently. Then came more questions about what she was doing, why she wore that hoodie, where she was going, and if she had identification. She responded quietly, trying to remain courteous. She was unsure of the rules, only recalling what her father had advised. Stay calm, avoid arguments, and do not make sudden movements. However, the officer either ignored her or did not care. Without any warning, Officer Brian Henderson grabbed her wrist. "Wait," she said, surprised. "Turn around," he ordered. In moments, she was spun around, her backpack pulled roughly, and her feet slipped off the curb's edge. She attempted to steady herself with her right arm as it was forced behind her back. Then she let out a sharp, tearing scream. This startled two pedestrians across the street, who paused and began recording with their phones. A woman yelled, "She is just a child! What are you doing?" Henderson did not respond. He now had a knee pressing into her back, pinning her to the sidewalk. Her cheek was scratched, and she could not move her right arm, which hung helpless and burning. Emily tried to raise her head, crying and trembling, struggling to grasp what was happening. "I told her to stop resisting," he barked without even glancing at the people filming. But she had not struggled or fled. She simply had not moved fast enough for him. By the time backup arrived, Emily was sobbing on the ground, her right arm swelling visibly beneath the torn sleeve of her hoodie. She had blood dripping from her elbow. An older officer approached, glanced at her, and muttered a curse under his breath. Then he instructed Brian to step back. The woman recording the scene moved closer and said, "I captured everything. She never touched him." Emily continued to cry as they placed her in the ambulance. A medic asked her name once more, and between gasps she replied, "Emily Coldwell." That surname was the one that would change everything. What had started as a regular stop would soon ripple through an entire community. By evening, the hospital's emergency room was too brightly lit, filled with the sharp scent of plastic and bleach. Emily lay on the narrow bed, her face blotchy from tears, her arm elevated and wrapped in several layers of gauze and foam. The break was severe but clean, just above the elbow, a spiral fracture, the doctor explained, caused by a twisting force when someone pulls too hard. Her mother, Karen Monroe, sat beside her with tightly pressed lips, her hand softly stroking Emily's leg through the blanket. Since their arrival, she had only spoken when necessary to the nurses. Her silence was not shock, but burning anger that weighed heavily in her chest. Occasionally, she would look down at her daughter's swollen arm, then glance toward the door as if expecting someone. Then he entered the room. There was no knock, no introduction, just the door sliding open, revealing Daniel Monroe stepping inside. Quiet and upright, the way he always entered a room. He was tall, broad, and exuded a calm that was impossible to miss. He remained composed in a way that made others uneasy. His jaw was clenched and his gaze unwavering as it focused directly on the cast. Emily noticed him and tried to sit up. "Dad," she whispered. He moved swiftly toward her without a word, gently taking her good hand and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "What happened?" His voice was low and firm. She began to explain. It was Karen, but then stopped, exhaling deeply as she stood. They said she fought back. Some officer claimed she seemed suspicious. He clenched his fists in frustration. They broke her arm, Daniel. Emily's eyes welled up again, but she held back the tears, comforted by her father's presence. That meant a change was coming. He looked at her once more. "Did you resist?" "No," she barely whispered. "Did you touch him?" "No." "Did he explain why he stopped you?" She shook her head. "He just asked where I was going, then grabbed me." Daniel leaned in, his voice quiet yet intense. "I want you to remember everything clearly. Tonight we will write down every detail. Understood?" She nodded as a tear trailed down her cheek. He brushed it away tenderly with his thumb. He rose slowly and turned to Karen. "Who is the officer?" She handed him the intake form. "Brian Henderson, Modesto Police Department." Badge numbers were listed on the report. Daniel read the details once, then folded the paper neatly and placed it inside his coat pocket. "Is there any footage?" he inquired. Karen nodded. "2 people recorded it. I already have 1 clip and it's being shared around." He remained silent for several moments, hands clenched at his sides. "I will speak with the chief," he said at last. Karen looked doubtful. "Are you sure you do not want to call a lawyer first?" "Oh, I will," he replied. "But I will see him face to face. They must meet my gaze when I reveal what lies ahead." The way he spoke was calm, composed, and unmistakably clear. Karen shivered, not out of fear or worry, but from a profound intuition that something inside her husband had changed. He had stepped away from fighting years ago, left the public eye, opened a training center for young ones, stayed low profile, gave occasional interviews, and taught teens how to punch without losing their composure. Yet, this was no longer about restraint. It was about his daughter. Back in the hospital bed, Emily observed him closely. "Are you angry with me?" His eyes softened in a way they never had before. "No, sweetheart. I am angry on your behalf." She sniffled and said, "I did nothing wrong." He knelt beside her again and whispered, "I know, and I will make sure everyone else understands that as well." Then the door opened once more. It was only a nurse this time, but Daniel was already rising, already grabbing his phone. There were calls to place, not to friends, but to journalists, lawyers, and those in his debt. People who recalled his legacy in the fighting arena. People who remembered the man he used to be before vanishing from the spotlight. He was not returning to battle in the ring. He was coming back to resolve unfinished matters beyond it. Yet Daniel Monroe was not one to shout or cause a scene. His influence was forged through quieter strength. Before Daniel became a devoted father and taught self-defense to adolescents at that small gym on Crawl Road, he was known in the fight community simply as the technician. Not because he hit harder than everyone else, although he certainly could, but because his strikes were precise and calculated. Calm in stressful situations, he was the type of fighter who never wasted a single move. Born in Stockton, California, he was raised by his grandfather, a retired Army mechanic who valued three principles: order, discipline, and always leaving one's shoes by the door. Daniel absorbed these lessons deeply. At the age of 14, he discovered a boxing gym on the other side of town and never looked back. By the time he was 24, he had become a world champion in mixed martial arts. Interviews, magazines, endorsements surrounded him, yet he disliked the spotlight. Fame did not change him. Rather, it made him more reserved and withdrawn. While other fighters celebrated, he studied recordings. When others boasted, he listened carefully. This careful approach is why he lasted longer than most in the sport. However, after defending his title 3 times, he stepped away quietly. No celebrations, no media tours. He left his gloves on the mat, packed a bag, and vanished without a trace. Just like that, he married Karen 2 years later, opened a gym in Modesto, and began training children who were one poor choice away from a troubled future. No cameras, no lights, only hard work, discipline, and new opportunities. Word about his coaching spread quickly. Parents brought their sons to him, teachers recommended students, and ironically, the police department sent troubled youth under juvenile agreements. He never turned away anyone willing to change. Yet he had firm rules: no swearing and no arrogance. If you got into fights at school, you were out, and if you lied, you had to run laps. He taught his children to meet people's gaze without hesitation, to never strike unless it was absolutely the last resort. Yet now his own daughter had come back home, wounded by a man wearing a badge. That badge granted him the authority to wield force without facing repercussions. This reality felt deeply wrong to Daniel Monroe, not only as a father, but also as a fighter and as a man. The following morning, he stood by himself in the gym, observing the sunlight filtering through the upper windows. While securing the ropes of the boxing ring, Brian Henderson, one of his most loyal students, arrived early. "Coach, I heard about Emily. Is she all right?" Daniel nodded quietly. "She's resting now." Brian responded, "That video is spreading everywhere. My sister sent it to me last night. That officer really hurt her badly." Daniel remained silent at first, focusing on tightening the ropes. "Are you going to do something?" Brian inquired. Daniel met his gaze and replied, "What do you think, Brian?" Brian gave a small, uncertain smile. "I think he is in serious trouble." Daniel did not return the smile and said, "No, we are the ones in trouble. If people believe they can hurt a girl on a sidewalk and walk away untouched, then this is no longer just my battle." Brian lowered his gaze. That very afternoon, Daniel reached out to a friend in the local media, Nicolette Grady. She was a freelance reporter who used to train in his gym. Years ago, she covered stories that rarely made the evening news. Daniel trusted her, unlike most others. When she answered, her voice carried surprise. "Daniel Monroe, I have not heard your voice in a decade. I need a favor," he said. "Do you still have your camera, always?" "What is happening?" "I am holding a press conference tomorrow at my gym at 12 o'clock. "I want you to record it," Emily said with a pause. "A press conference for what reason?" "For an officer who fractured my daughter's arm and assumed no one would pay attention." Silence followed on the other end. "Then I will be there." Daniel hung up and stared at the wall covered with black and white photographs in the gym office. They showed fighters he had trained, kids who had grown up. Some of them now had jobs, some had started families, while others were still trying to find their path. However, each one had learned one lesson from him. When someone attacks you, you do not run. You stand your ground and respond. But now, it was his own daughter who had suffered an injury, and that changed everything. By the time Daniel arrived at the Modesto Police Department the next morning, the receptionist already knew his name. "Mr. Monroe, Chief Arliss is expecting you," she said, standing up a little too quickly as if she had practiced the line. He followed her past a row of desks into a small office with dark carpeting and fluorescent lights humming softly above. Chief Harold Arliss, a man in his late 50s with a sagging mustache and a belly that did not quite fit his belt, stood and shook his hand. "Daniel," the chief said, offering a forced smile. "Listen. I just want to say I am not here for sympathy." Daniel interrupted him. "I am here for answers." The chief's smile disappeared. They took their seats, and a detective joined them with a laptop already open. The air smelled of stale coffee and aged paper. "I would like to review the body camera footage," Daniel stated firmly. Daniel said Chief Arliss shifted uncomfortably. "It is part of an internal investigation." Daniel leaned in closer and said, "Do not waste my time. I already have 2 cell phone videos. I want to see the footage your officer recorded." The detective hesitated for a moment, then turned the laptop toward him and pressed play. The video started with static, then showed Officer Brian Henderson adjusting the camera on his chest. The timestamp read 4:26 in the afternoon at Madison Street. Emily entered the frame walking with earbuds in and a backpack tightly secured. Henderson called out to her and she glanced over before approaching him. Daniel watched silently as the interrogation began, questions growing increasingly accusatory. Emily responded clearly and calmly without raising her voice or walking away. Suddenly, Henderson grabbed her wrist and forcefully twisted her arm behind her back. Her screams pierced through the audio. Then came a sharp sound that made Daniel clench his jaw. He did not blink and kept watching as the officer pressed his knee into his daughter's back while saying, "Stop resisting." Her face contorted in pain. The detective paused the video. Daniel quietly said, "That is enough." Silence fell in the room. Chief Arliss cleared his throat and said that the matter was under review. Officer Henderson claimed she had pulled away. Daniel interrupted firmly. "She did not." Arliss nodded. "I understand. It looks that way, but she did not." Daniel repeated more forcefully, "She did not. I want him off the streets today." Arliss sighed and explained, "We have placed him on administrative leave during the investigation, but we must follow protocol." Daniel rose to his feet. "Your procedure allowed a man to send a child to the hospital. That is your system at work. He did not wait for any reply. He left the office, walked down the corridor, and stepped out into the stifling heat. Sitting in his truck, he stayed silent for a long moment. No music, no air conditioning, only the memory of Emily's scream reverberating in his mind. Then he pulled out his phone and called Nicolette. "Are you ready with the footage?" he asked. "I have it," she replied. "It needs to be seen tonight." Nicolette uploaded a side-by-side comparison featuring body cam footage and one of the cell phone videos. There was no narration, only raw clips with one phrase in bold white text. "This is how you treat a 13-year-old girl." By morning, the video had gathered over 200,000 views. Twitter exploded, sparking questions. Parents in Modesto demanded answers, and emails flooded the police department. Brian Henderson's name was trending everywhere. At breakfast, Emily scrolled through the comments on her phone. Some messages offered support. Others were harsh and cruel. She set the phone down. Daniel sat next to her and asked, "Do you want me to stop?" She shook her head no, and he looked at her again, saying, "Then we don't stop." Later that day, Daniel began reaching out to parents of children he had coached, former pupils, teachers, and previous clients. He was not organizing a protest, but gathering witnesses, people who had seen the silent impact of injustice, who had stories to share and needed a platform. He called it a community meeting, but in his heart, it was something more. It was the start of a battle. However, simply watching a screen would not suffice. Daniel Monroe needed to make people experience the emotions he was feeling. By noon the following day, the gymnasium was filled, not with students or fighters, but with folding chairs, cameras, boom microphones, and an atmosphere so heavy, it seemed as though someone had spread weight across the floor, creating a sort of cushion. Local news vans lined the street outside. Former students stood closely together at the back while parents took seats near the front. Some remained in their work attire, others held their children's hands. At the heart of this gathering stood Daniel Monroe, alone inside the ring, where he had not stepped for 10 years. He wore a plain black polo shirt without any logos and maintained a calm expression. Emily stood just off to the side with the camera rolling, her gaze sharp and focused. Daniel did not clear his throat, nor did he request attention. Instead, he began to speak. "My daughter's name is Emily Monroe. She is 13 years old. 2 days ago, while returning home from practice, she was stopped, forced down to the ground, and suffered a broken arm caused by a police officer who judged her hoodie as a threat." He looked directly into the camera and added, "She did not resist. She followed every instruction. Yet she ended up lying in a hospital bed, crying because someone with authority decided she appeared dangerous." The room remained silent, without flashes or coughs, merely the heavy impact of his words pressing upon everyone's chest. "For the last 15 years, I have taught young people how to protect themselves, how to remain calm, how to avoid conflict. I believed I was doing the right thing, but now I must question myself. What is the value of teaching self-control when those in authority show none?" He paused to let the question resonate. Officer Brian Henderson fabricated details in his report. He stated she resisted. He said she was hostile. He insisted he had no alternative. Daniel Monroe held up a small flash drive. "This contains the body camera footage. I have shared copies with several journalists. You can view it right now if you wish. Every claim he made is false." The quiet shifted to whispers. Phones appeared as people began watching the footage live. "I am not here to condemn all police officers. I am not calling for vengeance. I am here because my daughter fears stepping outside. Because she startles when someone approaches from behind. And if I allow this to pass, if we all ignore it, we tell our children their suffering is meaningless. Daniel moved forward. I did not raise my daughter to live afraid, nor did I teach her to remain silent. He stepped down from the stage, and neither should you. The crowd responded, not with loud shouts but with movement. Some stood and applauded. Others approached to embrace him. A father raised his phone, showing the video already streaming on YouTube. A reporter from KMOD 11 pushed through the crowd. Mr. Monroe, do you intend to file charges? Daniel did not even glance at her. I intend to make certain that man will never touch another child again. Later, outside the gym, cameras followed him to his vehicle. He did not stop and was not there to give statements. He had already said everything that mattered. At home. Emily sat on the sofa, her arms still secured in a sling, as she watched the live broadcast. Karen was seated next to her. Emily wondered why he never spoke that way during the fights. Karen gave a faint smile and said it was because back then, he had nothing to prove. Daniel came home a few hours later. He walked past the cameras waiting outside without saying a word, only pressing a gentle kiss to Emily's forehead. He slipped off his shoes and settled in the living room. There were no cameras now, no reporters, just his family. That night, the video of his speech reached 500,000 views. Officer Brian Henderson was placed on indefinite administrative leave. The mayor issued a statement and the police department began a thorough internal investigation. However, none of it mattered to Daniel. Not yet. Going public was only the first stage, and Daniel never took a fight lightly or personally. Modesto was not a town where change came quickly. The community clung to familiar routines: church every Sunday, high school football games, yard sales, longtime neighbors. Yet in the days following Daniel's press conference, something shifted. It began with the students. Emily's classmates, some who barely knew her, showed up wearing hoodies, green ones, with her name written on masking tape and stuck to their sleeves. A group made posters and stood quietly outside the main office before the first period. They didn't shout or cause a scene. They just stood there, their message clear. She could have been any one of us. 13 is not a threat. The school labeled it a disruption, but parents saw it as a powerful statement. That week, Karen started receiving emails from teachers she had never met who wanted to check on Emily. Some shared stories about how their own students were opening up for the first time, revealing similar experiences. A teacher at Bennett High admitted that their nephew had been stopped 5 times within a single year, just for walking home after practice. At Daniel Monroe's gym, attendance doubled as kids brought along their friends, and parents stayed longer after dropping them off. One father, a mechanic named Victor Lozano, asked if he could volunteer to clean the bathrooms, saying, "I just want to help out, man." Even people who had never been inside the gym showed up with envelopes filled with cash. No names were given, no questions asked, just quietly folded bills and a short, whispered thank you. However, not everyone embraced these changes. One morning, Daniel found the words, "Keep your mouth shut," spray painted in red on the side of his garage. Later that evening, Karen noticed 2 phone calls from unknown numbers. The third time someone finally spoke, warning, "You're going to get someone hurt if you keep running your mouth." Daniel reported it to the police, but no one followed up. He refused to back down. About a week after the press conference, he received a call from Deputy Chief Pamela Greer, who sounded tense. "Daniel, "I'd like to meet privately," she said. "No cameras?" he asked. "No cameras," she confirmed. They met at a local diner, one of those places with vinyl booths and walls crowded with photos. She was already there, sipping coffee and scanning the room. "I'll be honest with you," she began. She said as he took his seat. "The department is under immense strain, real strain." Emily remained quiet. She went on. "Officers are demanding Brian Henderson's return to duty, while others want him gone. The chief feels trapped between them and the mayor, and his patience is wearing thin." Daniel folded his hands calmly. "You didn't summon me to discuss office politics, did you?" "No," she replied. "I brought you here because this city is picking sides, and far more people listen to you than to him." He met her gaze finally. "So what do you expect from me? Time? Space? Allow the internal affairs process to unfold naturally. The investigation is active and detailed. We are examining everything carefully." "You've had access to the footage," Daniel said quietly. "You had it the very night it occurred and did nothing with it." "I did not. The department did. And now my daughter flinches whenever someone knocks on the door." Emily leaned back. "What is it you want?" "I want your officer charged. I want him stripped of his badge. I want someone openly to declare that what he did was wrong." She paused for a long moment. "I cannot guarantee all of that." Daniel nodded silently. "Then I will not remain silent." As he rose, she pulled a folded sheet from her bag and slid it across the table. "What's this?" "A file," she said. Anonymous complaints with Brian Henderson's name appearing repeatedly. He glanced at the folder, then back to her. She said no more and took a sip of her coffee. Later at home, Daniel shared the file with Karen Monroe. 3 complaints over the past 2 years, she read aloud. All young, all black, all Latino, all dismissed, until now. Daniel said she looked at him and asked what his plan was. He sighed deeply. "We have to raise our voices," but Brian was not finished, and neither was the truth. The more Daniel spoke, the more others felt encouraged to share their stories. Yet the louder the truth became, the harsher the reactions grew. One morning, Emily's school counselor called with a serious tone, advising her to stay home that day. The woman explained there had been a few vague threats, nothing specific but concerning enough to take seriously. Karen ended the call and glanced across the kitchen table at her daughter, who was still eating cereal with her left hand. Emily's sling had been removed, but she winced when moving her elbow too quickly. "Mom, am I in trouble?" she asked. "No, sweetheart," Karen reassured her. "Some people are just afraid of facing the truth." "This isn't your fault." Emily looked down sadly. "I did not ask for any of this." Karen gently replied, "I understand. But now that it's here, we cannot back down." Later that same day, Daniel spotted a man sitting inside a parked car opposite the gym, engine running. The man was neither a student nor a parent, only watching quietly. As Daniel approached, the man rolled up his window and drove away. That night, an envelope was slipped under the gym door with no return address or handwriting, only a single printed photo inside. It showed Emily leaving school, circled ominously in red marker. Karen wanted to call the police again, but Daniel did not bother this time. Instead, he installed cameras, instructed his gym team to escort children to their vehicles, and started arriving 15 minutes earlier than the usual school pickup time. But the final push came from an unlikely source. Emily had been silent throughout the entire week. She did not voice complaints nor shed tears. Instead, She quietly observed her parents as they observed her. One evening, Daniel returned home to find her sitting in the living room, clutching his old GoPro with the recording light on. "What are you doing, Em?" he asked. Without averting her gaze from the camera, she said, "I have something to say." He sat beside her as she pressed record once more. "My name is Emily Monroe. I am 13 years old. A police officer broke my arm because he thought I looked suspicious. I did not resist. I did not shout. And I did not even understand what I had done wrong." She paused to breathe deeply. "I do not want people to pity me. I only want to be able to walk home without fear. I want to matter enough for others to admit what was done to me was wrong. That is all." Then she stopped the recording and handed the device to her father. "Do you think anyone will care?" she asked. He smiled gently and said, "I believe they already do." Daniel shared the video that very night. It was a raw clip. No hashtags, no music. Just his daughter speaking honestly for herself. By the next morning, it had reached 500,000 views. Local news picked it up, followed by national and finally international coverage. Their inbox flooded with messages, support from families, educators, and even former officers. Yet one message caught their attention. It came from a man named Jordan Cates, a patrol officer in Modesto. It was not public but a private note, only 5 lines long. "I was there the day Brian Henderson was hired. I have seen how he operates. Your daughter is not the first. The situation within the department was even worse than it seemed. If you are serious, I will talk." Daniel Monroe did not hesitate. He arranged a meeting for the following day at a secluded corner table in a library outside the city. Emily arrived in casual clothes, wearing a baseball cap and hoodie. Her face showed tension, and she did not shake hands. Instead, she simply sat down and began to explain. 3 years earlier, Brian Henderson had been flagged twice for using excessive force. One teenager suffered a concussion, and another had bruised ribs. Neither case was reviewed beyond an internal investigation. "Why not?" Daniel asked. Emily looked up and said the cases disappeared because the families did not push further. Some did not even know the full reports existed, and were told these were standard procedures. "I only discovered this because I was on desk duty and mistakenly read the wrong file," she admitted. Daniel leaned forward. "What about now?" Emily glanced around cautiously. "I will talk, but I need to know you are truly serious about uncovering the truth. I am not here just for appearances." She nodded decisively. "Then I will get you everything you need," he promised. Yet, another unexpected development awaited, this time coming from within the department itself. Emily kept her promise. 2 days after their meeting, she appeared at Daniel's gym carrying a flash drive hidden in the lining of her jacket. Without saying a word, she handed over the drive firmly and stated, "Do not call me. Do not involve me publicly. Just use this wisely." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Are you certain you are ready for what will follow?" he asked. "I have been troubled by this for a very long time," Emily replied. "Let the truth take its course." That night, Daniel did not hesitate to act. He sat at the dining table with Karen and Nicolette, the laptop open as the footage loaded. Emily had turned in early, exhausted after her therapy session. There were 4 files to review. The first was from a dash camera captured 3 years earlier. showing Brian Henderson forcefully pushing a teenage boy onto the hood of a squad car during a routine traffic stop. The boy was crying. He was not even the driver. The second file displayed an altered body camera recording labeled "Final Report," placed next to the unedited original footage. The side-by-side comparison revealed cuts in moments when Henderson shouted, grabbed, or issued threats. Karen whispered, "They manipulated it." Nicolette simply stared, shocked. "They have been doing this for years," she said quietly. The third video captured Henderson at a training seminar where he ridiculed protesters, laughing and making remarks that were not just insensitive but purposeful. The final file was a memo detailing internal complaints that were deliberately suppressed. 2 officers who attempted to report Henderson faced reassignment, and 1 eventually resigned. Daniel closed the laptop firmly. "We release everything," he said firmly. "Nothing censored, nothing obscured." Nicolette leaned in. "Are you certain? This will shake the entire department." He met her gaze without hesitation and said, "Let it shake." The following morning, Nicolette published the story along with the complete footage and uncut article. The department's culture of violence and silence within Modesto PD was exposed. She scheduled the post for 6 a.m. By midday it was trending across California, spreading faster than she could track. Local journalists swarmed the gym once more, hungry for answers. National news outlets called incessantly. City Hall immediately convened emergency meetings on that very day. The district attorney held a press briefing stating, "We are officially charging Officer Brian Henderson with aggravated assault, falsifying official documents, and obstructing justice. He has been detained and is no longer part of the Modesto Police Department." Daniel watched the live coverage from the gym's reception desk. With his arms crossed, he remained expressionless and unwavering. The ordeal was far from finished. 1 week later, Daniel was asked to speak at a town hall gathering. The room was filled to capacity with community members, students, officers, educators, and local officials seated along the rear wall. Quiet and composed, he stepped up to the microphone and said, "This situation is not about one individual officer. It concerns the system that enabled his actions, the people who witnessed harm to children and chose to remain silent. It is about the silence we have been conditioned to accept." He glanced across the room and found Emily sitting alone near the back. Their eyes connected as he declared, "This cannot be the conclusion of this story. My daughter should not be a mere footnote in your training guide. She must serve as a reminder that those you vow to protect are watching, and we will no longer be silent." Genuine applause erupted from the audience, sincere and unreserved. The police chief soon resigned, and 2 days afterward, the city council initiated a comprehensive audit of the police department's internal affairs procedures. Meanwhile, a civil rights group announced the opening of a local Modesto office to handle related cases involving Brian Henderson and others. He was held in the county jail while awaiting his trial. At home, Emily was still moving somewhat slower than before. Her physical therapy sessions were helping, yet the stiffness in her arm served as a constant reminder. One evening, Daniel found her in the backyard, shadow boxing with her left hand. "You switching hands on me now?" he asked, smiling. She grinned back, "Trying to keep you guessing." He stepped closer and raised his palms. "Show me what you've got." She threw a few gentle jabs. He caught them easily. "Not bad," he said, "but work on your balance." "I am," she replied. "I just never had to fight with one arm before." He nodded. "Sometimes that is all it takes." But Daniel was not after a simple badge. He had his eyes set on something much bigger. 3 months later, the Monroe household felt different. It was not quieter, but more steady. Emily was back in school full-time. Though her routine had changed, no more walking alone, fewer overnight stays, more check-ins, her spirit was starting to come back. She laughed again and cracked jokes during dinner. She spent hours drawing in her sketchbook, something she hadn't touched since leaving the hospital. The sling was gone, and the therapy was making progress. Her right arm remained stiff in the mornings, but the doctor assured her she would regain most of her movement. The scar near her elbow, however, would remain a battle mark, as she called it one day, pulling up her sleeve to show a friend. Daniel watched quietly from the hallway. He did not interrupt. He just listened. Changes were happening at the gym as well. They introduced new initiatives such as self-defense courses for girls, workshops on legal rights, and after-school study sessions. Karen took the lead in organizing these programs frequently, balancing her work alongside late-night planning discussions. Volunteers came and went, yet the core group remained committed. Daniel renamed the gym the Monroe Center, not in his own honor, but to celebrate Emily. A mural hung on the far wall, painted by a former student now working in Los Angeles. It depicted a young girl standing on a cracked pavement, a hoodie casually resting on her shoulder, with a narrow beam of light filtering down. It was neither inspiring nor dramatic, just authentic. Every child entering the building would see that image. One afternoon, Emily entered the gym and found her father practicing with the heavy bag alone. Sweat dripped from his forehead. Although he had not stepped into the ring for several months, his movements were still precise, controlled, and deliberate. She asked, "Are you training for something?" He did not look up, only brushing off the rustiness. She approached and leaned on the ropes, then asked if he had ever thought about returning to the ring seriously. He hesitated, then lowered his gloves and said, "No. I have had my fights." Emily tilted her head and replied, "Are you sure? You seem to miss it." He glanced over with a smile and said, "Maybe. But now I get to teach the good ones how not to end up with hands like mine." He showed his knuckles, scarred and stiff from decades of fighting. Emily nodded, noting they still looked impressive. That same evening at dinner, she asked a question that had not been heard for many months. "Can I walk to school again?" Karen hesitated and replied, "By yourself?" Emily answered, "Yes." Emily chose the longer route with her friends. Daniel and Karen exchanged a silent look. It was not fear, nor was it worry. It was a quieter feeling, a subtle hesitation that belongs to parents who have already witnessed too much. "Are you certain you are ready?" Daniel asked. Emily nodded, saying, "I refuse to be afraid of a simple sidewalk." He smiled and said, "Then go own it." They kept it low-key, no cameras or speeches involved. Just a peaceful morning. Emily left with her backpack and walked alongside two classmates. They didn't wear matching hoodies or wave signs, but when they reached the corner where the incident took place, all three paused. Emily glanced down at the pavement, then looked up and continued walking. Later that afternoon at the gym, a newcomer arrived, a fifth grader named Eli. He was small for his age, and his eyes showed nervousness. Daniel knelt beside him asking, "Have you ever been inside a gym before?" Eli shook his head. "Are you scared?" Daniel nodded in understanding. "That's all right. The first time I stepped into a ring, I could barely breathe." Eli looked up and asked, "Did you get hurt?" "Not that day," Daniel responded. But later, yes, more than once. Why did you come back? Daniel smiled and said, because I learned something. He nodded toward the mural on the wall. It's not about how strong you are. What truly matters is what you do after you've been hurt. Standing up, he placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. Let's get to work. That night, as the gym grew dark and the main door locked, Daniel sat in his office with a notepad open. At the top he wrote, "Justice does not end when someone is punished. Everything starts when people no longer feel fear." Then he switched off the light. Justice is not about a single individual being defeated. It is about ensuring that the next child remains safe and protected.